obviously when the Crips and the Bloods came over from Los Angeles, you know, they started their different areas of Crips and Bloods. You got the Hollywood, this, and and they have the different factions. So it kind of depends on what you're saying, what you mean by that. So you're always going to have people who are in gangs. Some of them are active in different ways. Even in Fort Worth, we're not having great turf wars. Usually the black gangs are in the selling drugs and things like that. If they shoot one another, it's usually over beef. One of the reasons why people get involved in gangs is lack of connection in other places. People want to be connected. They don't have that connection at home. So, or they don't feel the connection at home. So they get involved with somebody that they can actually call a family. And they start in doing things that are aberrant, getting involved in negative things. So when 2 or 3 people join together for a criminal enterprise, that's basically a gang, and they name themselves, and they a lot of times people in gangs, they get respect because the main way that people get respect in society is by doing something, by your job. You know, I'm doctor so-and-so, I'm lawyer so-and-so, I'm officer so-and-so. But if you want respect, and a lot of young men, they want respect, and one of the ways they can get it is by causing fear. So it's important for us to put a model of manhood. Because most of our gang members are men. The girls get involved in gangs for different reasons. They're becoming violent and stuff, but usually it's the guys. It's like 80% of the prison population is male because of the testosterone and all that stuff. And we're not going to get into that. So I'm just saying that you have to realize that men have 10 to 20 times of testosterone that women have. And part of that is what causes them to be aggressive risk takers when you're young, when you're at that age where you're most vulnerable, your teenage years, up until about 25 when your prefrontal lobe is actually fully developed. Until that time, the limbic system is throwing out the emotions, and you have no governor. So it's important, and you got to realize that 72% of our young black kids are born out of wedlock, and that means that quite a bit of those don't have a father at home to be a mentor, so they go out and get their mentorship somewhere else. No matter where you are in the world, teenagers, whether you're men or you're male or female, they get involved in more trouble. They get more broken arms. All that stuff happens during teen years. So you need somebody to help guide you. Now this is one of the strange things of life. When you're young and you have energy, you have time, you don't have wisdom. When you're old and you don't have energy and you don't have time, you have a little bit more wisdom. So the ones who are a little more humble and listen go further in life. So once again, connection. It's important to have that connection at home. It's important to have that connection with wholesome friends. It's important to have that connection. So even when you take your kids to college, go there ahead of time, get them involved with groups that's good. Because if not, the first friends they make, they're going to do things, right? How can two walk together unless they agree, right? So they're going to do things with those friends, so it's important. So yeah, we need to give our kids something to do. But most of all, they need mentorships with adults, and boys need men to help them to learn to be men. Mothers do a great job. I was raised by a single mother. Okay? They do a great job in doing what they do. But my mother can't teach me how to be a man.
Amen.
Okay? So if you're a single mother, you know, if there's a couple in the church that you can lean on, or an uncle or somebody like that can take your son under his wing and show some discipline. Remember, discipline is consistent and immediate. It's continuous. You don't get lazy in doing discipline. You got to train. Your training, discipline is training. It's not assaulting your children. It's training. So get somebody in his life that's going to exert some loving discipline. Remember, rules out relationship equals rebellion. Loving relationship, and that's going to be a structure in his life, mainly boys and girls too. Girls need fathers. They need men in their life so that they can say, hey, this is the type of man that I'm going to marry. And same thing with, sons. So it's important that, and I'm going on and on, I'm sorry. But it's important that these things are here. So yeah, so it depends on what you're talking about. Yes, gangs are increasing to a certain extent, but not really. We're not having a big thing of gang violence in Fort Worth that we encourage. We basically stay on top of our gang members and we deal with them accordingly. But yeah, there's new gangs being built, often.
Just to add to that, parents, we gotta make sure we pay attention to our children are listening. Yes. Right? Because now we have this glorified amount of rap artists that are gang members. And so we're having that constant feed to children's brains morning, noon, and night. And even if it's not in your house, it's in somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are watching TV stations that are glorifying gang activity, your children are taking that in. And if it's cool to someone in Hollywood, because my favorite rapper is Charlie Bloods, your favorite rapper ain't really been to the hood either. Yeah. But then your favorite rapper live on the hood. I'm gonna do that too.
They certainly don't live there now.
Not ever.
Half of them ain't living there when they're writing about it.
They wearing colors.
Yeah, that's right.
So we don't get the real world side until we find out our favorite rapper then got shot and killed, right? Because of what he's representing. But we have to pay attention to what our children are listening to and watching. Because social media is glorifying you every single day.
Yes.
Their friends are like, hey, you heard what happened with so-and-so? Man, that game bomb. I'm a join too. What are you gonna join me with? It's things that you gotta do in order to join a gang if you don't know how to do it. But if you got friends that's listening to the same thing, we gonna figure it out together. We gonna tell our friends, we gonna figure it out together. And we gonna hide whatever colors we supposed to be flying from our parents, and we gonna change when we get to our parents' house. I know some people didn't have that happen before. They didn't change clothes because they didn't want their mama to see they was wearing. But that's what's going on. We gotta pay attention to what our children are listening to and what we programming in their minds every noon and night. Because the first thing in the morning, if I'm listening to so-and-so, I'm in a gang and I'm shooting this and I'm shooting that and I'm listening to it when I get home and go in bed.
You waking up shooting.
There we go.
They're really fond of one color.
Yeah.
Green.
Or red.
Or blue.
And a lot of times parents, they're oblivious to it. They're like, not my son. I mean, they all look in the game files and doing all kind of things, but it's just some parents are they can't think any wrong. Like JJ mentioned earlier, you got to open your eyes, because when we close our eyes and don't say anything and we don't hold our children accountable, guess what? Their lives are going to be very, very hard. This young officer right there.
I just want to ask 3 questions, but it's not for a verbal response. I just want to see hands, especially from the youth. My first question is, by show of hands only, how many of you know someone that is in a gang? You don't say who, don't say where, don't say what. Just by a show of hands, how many of you know someone that's in a gang? Or says that they're in a gang?
Hold them high.
Hold them up. Adults, parents, kids, everybody. Okay, put your hands down. The second thing I would ask, again, you don't have to say who, you don't have to do any of that. How many of you know someone in your family that identifies themselves with the gang? Old school, OG, or new? Okay, and then my third question is not for hands, it's just for thought. When you knew, what did you do or not do, and what are you doing now?
I do think it's positive that a lot of our young people don't know anybody like that.
That's good.
Because whoever you surround yourself with, they're going to influence you, whether they're positive or negative. So create positive peer pressure. Okay.
And that's not a attack, that's not a you should be but it's just something to think about. We have everybody has that family member that we know is gonna get drunk at the family reunion. Everybody has that family member that's gonna just talk loud. Everybody has that family member that snores. Everybody has that family member that engages in activity that's not legal, and we typically just kind of socially accept it because that's Ray, or that's Pookie, or that's little JoJo, or that's cousin, or that's Keisha, or whoever. And at some point, it becomes an accountability thing. You're responsible for what you hear. You're responsible for what you see. I'm not saying you're supposed to call the police on every single family member, but there are things that you can do before it gets to us. Because sometimes we can do intervention and prevention. Sometimes we have to do apprehension. So we'd rather it be the intervention and prevention if we can help, but otherwise, I think sometimes we forget that at the end of the day, as much of these programs and different things that we have that we try to push first, we're supposed to serve first, but when it comes to the obligation to protect from whatever that is, then by law, we are required to do that. So I just wanted to ask that because it takes a village, and there are things that we know that we don't address, and then we're surprised when the police have to address them.
Thank you.
Quickly, before we get to the comment from Officer Moore, do you have anybody on the floor? 30 seconds. What did you do when you found out? And that's Officer Jenkins.
I'm from Oklahoma City, and what I do every other year is go back to the recreation center that raised us. We put together a group called Kid Center Reunion. We bring all the gang members, which is some of my cousins, are getting involved with the kids. We help the children out with school. It's a low income area. We get the radio station together, we get police officers, we throw a big party. And all the donations and the proceeds go to the kids in the community. So I go back home every other year and do this. So that, and I get my cousins involved because they're older, they used to be in gangs, now they donate and they help our kids.
She's turning to the
We have to move on to the next question. He had something back there. It's 7:12.
My name is Deputy Warren, Tarrant County Sheriff's Department. So I'm gonna demonstrate an illustration for how I believe gangs are actually, I get growing. So I have people in the center for me. Just stand right there. Now I'm gonna get a couple of y'all. So let's just say y'all in school, y'all may be in the hallway something. And I'm gonna demonstrate it for y'all. So you walking solo in school, you know, in the hallway, saying what's up to your boys. And all right, this is how gangs get started. You my homeboy, come on in. Let me get y'all two. Y'all come with me, y'all follow behind me. You see, this is how gangs start working. So he might know about maybe selling drugs, about guns. He might know how to get all the girls. He might be a ball player, but he just hanging out with us. You see how the group grows? You see how it grows? Now he's telling me how to sell drugs. He may be telling me how to shoot guns, and he just with us because he a hooper. You see what I'm saying? This is how gangs work. So now we a big group getting into the wrong situations and the wrong things. You see what I'm saying? This is how gangs start. So we walk into high school, we started from one person walking alone to meeting different types of people. And then him knowing the wrong thing, him knowing the wrong situations, and him just being a hooper, just hanging out with us. That's how it is. And so, now with everything going around in the streets and in school and stuff like that, you got some cops, and you know, I'm gonna be real with you, little black boys, black kids, they ain't feeling cops. Why? Because they feel like they're killing us and stuff. So he know how to shoot, right? So he gonna teach us how to shoot. And maybe we'll shoot at the cops, or maybe we'll shoot at people that don't wanna mess with us, or that wanna beef with us and stuff. That's how I saw gangs were when I was growing up and stuff. Like people that used to come to my house, it was all about hooping. Next thing you know, 6 years down the line, they in 35 for murder, or they doing it for drugs and stuff. And it all started like this. All started from hooping, him knowing how to shoot guns, him knowing how to sell drugs. And that's just a click right there, that's a gang.
Yeah.
So I want y'all to be vigilant, like I hear about watch who your friends hang around with and stuff like that. But sometimes people ain't gonna talk about what they're actually doing at home, and you're not gonna see everything. Cause I'll be real, he can take me to his house, his daddy ain't gotta be there. The way I learned about a gun is that my boy took me to his house, He took out the gun, ain't nobody was home, and he just showed me how to do it. I learned about weed and stuff because we know we was outside, parents thinking that we riding bikes and hooping, because we obviously got the hooper. And you know, we sitting there waiting for it to get a blunt and stuff. My family thinking I'm out there just hooping. Nah, man, we out here about to smoke a blunt and stuff. This is how gangs start. And then it just keeps on traveling and traveling. Then it gets bigger and bigger. And people start getting locked up and people start getting killed. That's my demonstration.
Wow. And actually, he's taking us into the next question.
Hi, my name is DJ Trevia, and I'm going to be going over police and community misunderstandings. So the first question is, what is your city or police department doing about police brutality? What can we do to help control this? Why are some minorities afraid when they see police officers? How can we stop fear and bring better communication and relationships with our peace officers, which is police officers? Just like police brutality is wrong, assassinating police is wrong. What can we do to help protect our officers that are being killed because of the hatred towards police? How can we bridge the gap? What is your city doing to keep officers safe? What programs have you implemented to bring peace?
Thank you very much, DJ Trevia.
And we want to hear from the police officers, but we wanted to bring the Red Sea Project back up to discuss. Because we have a list they signed up for when they got here, y'all. So y'all like, really? Yeah.
Hello again. I'm sorry that I wrote my name on all of those. I mean,
I saw you.
So, this topic is really near and dear to my heart. I had the pleasure and the unfortunate pleasure of going into a church that experienced the death of a young man in Balk Springs that was shot by a police officer.
Yes, I know the family.
And so, in that, it was actually a mentoring workshop that went on for several months. I had the opportunity to hear the questions from children asking how they should engage with police officers and what happens if they do the right thing, but the wrong thing happens. So the reality is, in any organization, any company, any corporation, you have people that make good decisions and people that make bad decisions. So we don't want to paint any police officer with one brush that says all police officers are bad and all police officers don't like black children or black men or the African American community. The other thing that I want to say is that as a community, if we are not engaging with the police officers or the police department in our community, how will they know us? How will they know us? So back in the day, when police officers would do beats in different communities, they knew Lil Pookie was Susan's child.
Mm-hmm.
So when Lil Pookie was outside doing something that he shouldn't do, they could sound the siren, I'm sorry. They could hit the siren and say, hey, Lil Pookie, you shouldn't be doing that. I know your mom, you need to get on home, right? So it is not just the police department's responsibility to form relationship with the community, it's also the community's responsibility to form relationship with the police department. Not just when you have a complaint. They also need to know that, hey, you know what? We haven't had any break-ins in our community, and I want to thank the police department for doing their parts in the community. But also, when we come to complain, we don't need to come with emotion, you need to come with facts. Because when we come with emotion, who wants to hear somebody have, I call it emotional vomit. I'm just emotionally vomiting over everybody, and then I really want you to I want to get my point across, but can they really hear what your point is? So if you don't have facts, and I know that you probably gonna get mad when I say this, stay home. When you get your facts together, then approach the police department so you can have a constructive and what I say a courageous conversation where you can work towards solution and where you're not allowing the younger people to see you and then they begin to riot in the streets. Because they're feeding off your anger, they're feeding off your emotional vomit, if that makes sense. So in order for us to move towards a solution, especially with police departments everywhere, is community has to get involved. You have to get involved in your community. When you move into your community, it's more than just about do they have good schools and can I get a good price on my house. We have to get involved with the police department and have a better relationship and communication.
Thank you. Now we're to the officers.
So I wanted to give you a couple of stats for those of you that live in Arlington. First and foremost, again, this is my 14th year, and I remember going through the interviewing process, and people always ask, well, why did you want to be a police officer? Everybody says they want to help. I help with interviews, and there's a lot of different professions where you can help, but I wanted to help in this one for many reasons. One, I wanted to see people that look like me. I wanted to see women in the profession that look like me. And then I also wanted to, if there are things, just like you said, in any profession that may need like reformation, then I wanted to be a person that said I was trying to help that and not just always point fingers. But I wanted to give you some stats of my agency so you know the types of training that we go through to address it. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like we've never made mistakes. As police officers, period, I make mistakes as a person every day. The uniform gets put on, but I'm still the person that may potentially make a mistake during my day, during my life period. So some of the classes that we have, we hear about different use of force and officer-involved shootings, sometimes fatal, sometimes not. For mental health training for our academy, and this does not even include the requirements once you become an officer. It's about 1,200, almost 1,300 hours that we go through total for the academy. The state only requires 643. So that's double the effort. And that breakdown basically is 40 hours of mental health, peace officers, awareness, state laws, programming, not to include the grant things that I mentioned earlier. The state requires 40. We're also in the process of getting grants and information to get even more training. Procedural justice, which is very important when we start, talking about, oh, this officer's racist, this agency is racist. I teach a class on implicit bias in the workplace, and that's not just for law enforcement. So oftentimes what you'll see is people don't wake up and say, I'm racist, who can I go kill today? Everybody has biases. The problem that comes in is if they're not understood and not managed, and then you act out in fear, that's when you start seeing certain things happen. Whether it's use of force, whether it's arguments, whether it's officer-involved shootings, whether it's community and community shootings, people have biases, and you couple that with fear, and then you start seeing higher uses of aggression from any person. But procedural justice, we have 8. The state doesn't require it right now. Fair and impartial policing. In the academy, they get 6, and once we get out in the in-service, it's even more. LGBTQ awareness and information. We get hours on that as well, 4 hours. De-escalation, which is huge right now. Deconfliction and de-escalation, we have about 80 hours. The state requires 24. Racial profiling, we get about 4 hours in the academy, but then it doubles once you get out, and there's scenarios that are involved with all of these that I'm discussing. Excited delirium and aftercare, that's for people that you see in videos that get a hold of drugs and have stuff laced in them, and you see them acting out, and then it's like, well, why didn't y'all handle that this way? Well, you couldn't even handle it that way, and that's your family member, and we got called. And so we're having to address social issues now that are becoming criminal. So we're catching up and now getting ahead in the training so that we can have an interdisciplinary setup for us to be successful when we're engaged in the community. Autism spectrum and disorder and IDD, 3 hours. Civil rights training, 16 hours. The last few I said there's no requirements for the state. However, we are making efforts to do those. And then additionally, the Texas Combined Officer Law Enforcement Training, which is what we're governed by, TCOLE. Feel free to look on their website at our training, TCOLE. Requires every 2 years for officers to go through about 40 hours of training. We do that training annually. So we're actually getting double of what the state requires within that 2-year time frame. So it's not that it's not occurring, it's just that sometimes you have to want to know the information. It's easy to ask, but just like we go on the websites and find out when concerts are and plays and all this different stuff, if you just look at some of our agency websites, it's everywhere. If you come in our stations, it's everywhere. If you attend some of the programs that we put on, it's everywhere. I encourage everyone, I can speak for all the agencies, we all participate in National Night Out. That's where the communities come together and have that human connection. We have that information that's available as well. This year, the date is October
6th.
1st.
First.
It's typically on a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find more information out that way. But I just wanted to share that. I know the other agencies are pretty similar in their numbers as well, so that you know exactly what we're getting trained on and the efforts that we're trying to do to answer her question, to address perceived or actual brutality, or any other of those terms that you can use that are dividing us from being able to have human connection.
Hear the question again? Can I hear the question again?
Yeah, there were several parts. I just addressed one part.
He won't hear the question again.
I want to make sure.
What is your city or police department doing about police brutality? What can we do to help control this? Why are some minorities afraid when they see police officers? How can we stop fear and bring better communication and relationships with our police officers? Just like police brutality is wrong, assassinating police is wrong. What can we do to help protect our officers that are being killed because of the hatred towards police? How can we bridge the gap? What is your city doing to keep officers safe? What programs have you implemented to bring peace?
Can you address brutality to them so they'll know what brutality is? Some of the babies may not know. They may not know what brutality really is.
Do y'all know what it is? Brutality? We talked about on the show. You did, Corey?
Okay, so police brutality is like whenever police is being brutal, like.
So for the kids that don't know, police brutality, I'll tell you what it is. It's when, whether actual or perceived, because there's documented actual or perceived, interaction with the police officer where it results in verbal, physical, emotional abuse. It could include you having a complaint about being arrested and not being treated fairly. It can have something to do with you having force used on you, meaning like we assault you in some kind of way that you feel that uncomfortable. Now it's one thing like if you're being placed under arrest and it's lawful and you just don't want to go to jail, you feel like you were assaulted, but there are instances where officers documented have not properly responded and handled calls, and that's considered brutality, it's considered assault. Another way to also look at it is an example that I do whenever I do trainings on what to do when stopped by the police. There's a training that most agencies have that are pretty consistent, like a 7-step approach. If I'm coming to your car and I'm stopping you, how I should engage with you. That's why it's so important to understand what professionalism is, because I cannot like this gentleman, but I can be professional. Now that doesn't mean I'm saying I don't like you when I come on a traffic stop, but if you're professional, if you follow certain things that you're trained to do, then you should typically have the same result. What happens is when people deviate from it, that's when you start seeing the complaints, that's when you start seeing concerns from citizens or from officers. If we have people that we just stopped and they just go off as soon as the window's let down or the door's open. But to answer your question, it's behavior that is unprofessional, it's behavior that's unlawful, and it's behavior that's illegal, that could get us in trouble if we're not following procedure.
I have a quick question. So do you train the children in community of how to deal with y'all I think it's a problem with our children or black men, they don't know how to handle themselves when pulled over.
A lot of officers do. I know I personally do. I have some cards here if you ever want to call me to your organization or your church. And most officers, just like the example he gave, can do the same as far as what to expect, what we're thinking when we approach you on a traffic stop, information that we may already have before we even get to you, or indicators that we notice once we make contact with you. And we talk about what that looks like, what's correct, what's not correct. If it's not correct, here's your resources to make contacts. As a supervisor, I get contacts sometimes. If a person feels a certain way, there's body-worn cameras for some agencies now, and microphones and different things that we have. We also pass out, through the Sandra Bland Act, a complaint and commendation card with our department now. So whether you thought
Thank
that our
God.
stop was bad or good, you have the option to make contact to the police department and let us know exactly how you felt our interaction with you was, and it goes straight to internal affairs, and then it gets filtered through the different departments within the agency, depending on good or bad. We get them both.
Can I get the info, because I do a lot of work in Stop 6 Fort Worth, and the relationship with police is just not really good. They don't really trust, they don't, so I need some info to train them on how to behave and what's legal and not legal. That would help me a lot.
And like I said, we have a forward commander here, but some of the police associations assist with that also. But if I could impress upon you another thing that I encourage, because as it's already been established, if you didn't know anybody else, you know us for today, the two that are sitting here. All officers are not bad. We're not waking up saying, who can we go harass and do stuff to? But you have to stop telling your kids negative stuff about us.
That's right.
When I show up and I'm at Chick-fil-A and you, for whatever reason, can't control your kid, don't tell them, well, I'm just gonna send you with her, because I'm gonna turn around in front of you and tell them no. The only time I wanna see you is when you're doing good at school, or if you get an A on your report card or something like that, because in that instance, that's your span of control where you can address your child. But just pawning it off saying, I'm just gonna haul them away, one, it scares them and they don't wanna interact when there's an issue, and two, after a while it becomes crying wolf. Well, you say that all the time, Mom, you say all the time, Dad, you hadn't done it. So now, again, there's an erosion of that level of respect for different authority figures because nothing actually occurs. And then the caveat of it, when we do actually get called, then there's an issue with what we legally can do. And so it just becomes a cycle that we can break if we have those conversations, if we do those discussions and demonstrations, and we stop feeding, especially to our black and brown children, that police officers are bad. And the last little caveat, and I know y'all gonna laugh, and if it applies to you, then just say amen. But if you have a negative interaction, i.e. you're speeding, i.e. you don't have your insurance when you get stopped, or i.e. you have a domestic, it's not illegal to argue at home unless it falls under certain lawful parameters, that stuff that you just fighting each other and stuff like that kids are seeing, and we show up, then it becomes a negative stigma on us when there's issues at home that, for whatever reason, it happens, y'all, it happens, where things couldn't be addressed with just the responsible parties at home, so now we've had to intervene, and now there's a negative stigma because you took my mom to jail, or you took my dad to jail. So,
For the sake of time, I have one last comment from Officer.
There was a part of the question that said, what can we do to make kids not afraid of police officers or deputies, But my thing is, I know two sides of the game. I know what it's like to hate the police, and I know what it's like to have a friend get killed by the police and stuff. So, and I was raised in Arlington and stuff. So a little bit, a couple years ago, probably 2015, I had one of my friends I graduated with, and me and him were real cool, was actually killed by Arlington police officers. His name was Christian Taylor. At the car dealership. And me and him was actually real cool, and actually that's the other side of the game. I knew the cop that did it, that actually pulled the trigger and stuff. So so I'm not gonna even lie, I did have a little animosity towards Arlington Police Department because I was young and I was just his age, and I was like, dang, they done got one of my friends and stuff. I don't like them, forget the police. And it's funny I'm saying that because I'm standing here like a cop right now. But my thing is that what you said to stop the fear from police, well, you gotta understand that it was the individual, it's not the department, and every officer makes a decision. I mean, that's just the things that happen. You just can't blame every cop and say every cop is bad, every cop is this one type of way because of one mistake that one officer made. So one certain things that I started to do to get a different feel of different officers, I started talking to officers. I actually started taking ride-alongs. You know, I go out there before work, took a ride-along with Arlington PD. Because I used to want to be a cop when I was a kid, but when that situation happened, I was like, I don't want to do this no more. Because I'm going to give up on my dream because y'all killing my friends. You know what I'm saying? I'm sitting here crying and stuff, and y'all just going home when I got a friend going home dead. You know what I'm saying? So those are some of the things that I feel like as a kid or a youth that's growing up, those are some of the things that stop the fear. Take ride-alongs, talk to cops when you see them. Most cops are pretty cool. They just like us. You know what I'm saying? They just put on a badge and gun. They got to go home and stuff like that. And that's one of the things I would do to answer your question. Just talk to them.
Can I say something? Yeah. Just realize this, and this is a real touchy subject because people have deep feelings about this, and I understand the feelings that you all have, but it's our job to use force at times. I mean, that's part of our job. That's one of the ways we keep people safe, and we're human beings as well. So when we go to a scene and everybody's, you know, all up in arms, we're trying to figure out what's going on. Or when we make a traffic stop, we have to make sure we come home at night because we've seen videos of people who just got out the car and just started shooting and killed police officers. So we have to put ourselves on guard. However, if I see you, and I used to work off duty at a store, and people walk up to me and they're like, hey officer, how are you? This is my child, and this is what you do when you see a police officer, and very kind, it sets me at ease. But if you walk at me staring me down in your little gang attire, you're gonna get my attention. So don't say anything to me if you just say, why are you staring me down? Because you just, I mean, if you're in a club and somebody stares you down, they're gonna get your attention. Now, I don't go to clubs or anything like that. I'm waiting too long. But anyway, I'd never get there. But I'm just saying that we're just human. We're gonna respond, and it's our job to do this. So the way that we actually, the reason why people are afraid of us a lot of times is just by stories that other people tell and experience. You may have had a bad experience with a police officer, but that doesn't mean that everybody's that way. If a person got robbed by a black person and that person said, you know, all black people rob people. Yeah. They're terrible. I hate them. That's their experience. You see what I'm saying? And they're looking at television and they're seeing, you know, rap guys, you know, looking like gang members and, you know, all that stuff with money and crystal and, I mean, you know, it was basically backing up all that stuff that, you know, they feel. They have an implicit bias because in implicit biases, your mind takes shortcuts based on your experience. We all have implicit biases based on experience. So realize this. It's the same thing. So by experience and also stories. If you teach your children, as we talked about with teachers, to devalue teachers, or if you teach your children to devalue police officers, you're messing up their life. You're going to make it harder for them. Understand something. There are some police officers who are bad. Some people, you know, they do bad things.
So
but you know what?
So what do you do as a police officer to point that out?
Let me finish. I'll get to it. So there are some bad police officers, but they're very, very, very few. And because we have thousands of police interactions a day, and the only ones you see are those ones that are sensational. And even in those sensational ones, a lot of times the police officers do the right thing. But you don't know how we do what we do. So we have a simulator at our Fort Worth Police Academy. If you can go there and do the shoot, no shoot thing with the simulator, do it. It's an eye-opening experience. When you have to actually, you know, see how people respond.
Black
you have one preacher saying, you shot on a black man. Then the preacher goes there and shoots on a black man. During the simulation, they say, hey, you shot on a black man. Well, he was coming at me though. I didn't know what to do. You know what? It's different. So I'm just saying that it's an eye-opening experience. I'm not saying that, you know, anything's right or wrong. Just understand it. So what I'm saying is that it's by experience and it's by words. So we have to do in that particular situation, there's teachers that are bad, they sleep with their students.
Right.
There's ministers who are bad, they extort money, they sleep with people in the congregation. And there's doctors who are bad, you don't stop them from going to the doctor because of malpractice. And police officers are human because we're all sinful people and we make mistakes. So they're bad ones, but you know, we try to vet out those bad ones. So most of them are good, but a lot of times they're just, you know, matter of fact. So to point out the bad police officers, everybody in Fort Worth, I'm not wearing mine today, but I'm a commander. I don't answer any calls. I have a body worn camera. I just take it off because every time somebody pulls out their taser, the camera shoots on, even if you're in a bathroom. And it's not like I do that. But every officer, open the back door, camera shoots on, okay. But you know, every officer in Fort Worth has body worn cameras. So in every contact that they have with a citizen, they're supposed to turn that body worn camera on. We actually do audits, not just of the uses of force, because every time an officer uses force, the sergeant sees it, the lieutenant sees it, the captain sees it, the commander sees it, the deputy chief sees it, the assistant chief sees it. Every single time there's use of force, they see that investigation. A lot of eyes actually see that investigation. And you know what? We have fired people for using too much force. I'm recommending, you know, deep discipline right now as we speak. I've made several recommendations in the last month. I don't want to give out anybody's stuff, just in case they're watching or anything like that. But I'm just saying that we actually take those things seriously. And we'll get rid of an officer, or we'll discipline an officer, we'll give them days off. We'll do whatever we need to do in order to do that. But it's that onus is two-pronged. It's important for us to teach our children how to respond to police officers. Just do what you do to parents or what you do to teachers. Do what they tell you to do. Unless they tell you to do something illegal, immoral, unethical, you do what they tell you to do. And if you have a problem with what they do, talk to the supervisor, call internal affairs. Okay? Feel free to do that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure. I know this was going to be something that everybody hit on, so.
Maybe so.
We only got 3 minutes on it.
3 minutes. Well, you know, basically, this is something that I saw in the news, and it was basically, I can't remember, Fort Worth, Dallas, I'm thinking it was Fort Worth.